Started, everybody. We appreciate the nice music and the worship atmosphere today. And we're having fun, right? Fun in the sun in South Florida. All of us non-Floridians are having a blast down here, right? So if you look at your schedule, we pushed back the time clock a little bit. I'm Dr. Fletcher, and we're scheduled for lunch, I think, at 12:35. So we're going to push everything back a few minutes. And we have three great speakers, distinguished people to talk to you today. Mitch Dunnick is in Tulsa, where I live, and Dr. Swin is the president here, and Dr. Johnson as well. So I was 17 years old when I first saw James Winslow on television. I was a junior in high school, and I was just like Dr. Treadway and these other doctors have given their testimony. When did the Lord speak to you about going into medicine? So Dr. Winslow is a special person. He's our next speaker. He's near and dear to our hearts in the medical community at Oral Roberts University, as well as the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's a Tennessee native. He attended Rhodes College for his undergraduate studies before completing med school at UT Memphis. His postgraduate work was then accomplished at the prestigious Campbell Clinic in orthopedic surgery. After serving at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, he then came to Tulsa, Oklahoma to enter private practice. In addition to his excellent clinical acumen, his leadership skills soon became apparent both to his colleagues and his business leaders in the community. He organized what soon would become the largest orthopedic group in the state of Oklahoma, which is still in existence today. And during that same period of time, he was nominated to serve as the first under 40 member of the board of directors at St. Francis Medical Center. In our hometown, that's a big deal. That was something special, all right? And so, but what happened? What happens? Right about then, at the peak of his success, young orthopedic surgeon, well-known and well-liked by everybody, the Lord began to do a new work in his life, in the life of this rising star physician leader. One of Dr. Winslow's patients was a man named Oral Roberts, who was in the process of building a Christian university and a hospital. They became good friends and golfed a little bit together at Southern Hills Country Club. All the golfers say amen. Yeah, our beautiful PGA course in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So they became good friends, and from the years 1978 to 1987, they were led of the Holy Spirit to launch a medical school and to build a hospital. They worked very hard. They dreamed a dream, and this is the recurring theme we're hearing today, of how modern science and clinical medicine works together with the power of prayer and faith as we place our trust in a miracle-working God. So Dr. Winslow's role was as the founding dean of the ORU School of Medicine and CEO of the City of Faith Medical and Research Center. And this was central to his endeavor to attract excellent faculty members, of which we heard from one today, coming from all over the country and all over the world. Top-notch people, really good people who love God and who were good in their fields of study, to teach and inspire the next generation of young physicians to take God's healing power to their generation. In this room, there are a few of us today. I'm one of them. I'm one of them. Hallelujah. So his direct patient care as a surgeon has included medical mission outreaches worldwide to nations like Kenya, Uganda, Guatemala, South Africa, Jamaica, and Zaire. He worked briefly at a hospital made available by Campus Crusade in Swaziland. And finally, his career was completed after serving in rural southwest Oklahoma among the Chickasaw Nation people. The Apostle Paul said, and I'm talking to the students right now, I have a daughter who's going to the mission field this summer. She's an ER nurse, and another daughter in medical school at Oklahoma State. And so we're all of us guys, middle and late career people, are happy to see the young students, right? It's inspiring to us. The Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow me as I follow Christ. So that's what we're doing today, and I'm always encouraged to see what God's doing in this arena. So for the young students to identify and adopt a role model for you to emulate and to duplicate is a good plan. So please welcome to the podium Dr. James Winslow.
Thank you, sir. I looked around to see who it was you were introducing. No wonder I'm tired. Well, you're on safe. Can you hear me in the back? I wear hearing aids, and I can't tell if I'm talking loud enough or not. But you're in safe territory because all I know to say is on this little card. I was a 16-year-old high school basketball player in Jackson, Tennessee, who had just played in the finals of the state high school tournament, was supposed to be the player of the year next year in high school basketball, and there was not a hat in Jackson, Tennessee that would fit my head. I'm dating a little Baptist girl, and the deal was that I'm a Methodist, whatever that is, and the deal was that we had to go to our own church on Sunday morning, but on Sunday night we could alternate between the Calvary Baptist Church and the Hayes Avenue Methodist Church. Now, if you don't think I grew up a conservative Methodist, let me tell you what was on the door frame of the church I grew up in. Hayes Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church South. That told the whole story. You didn't need to do anything else. Well, we're sitting on the back row of the Calvary Baptist Church one night and holding hands, and I thought, that's what my life was going to be with this girl. And in the twinkling of an eye, I don't know if I heard God with my ears, with my heart, with all of the above or what. But he said to me, "You're going to be an orthopedic surgeon." Now, folks, I couldn't have spelled orthopedics to save my neck at that point in time. But I heard him, and I don't even know there was some kind of evangelistic minister there preaching that night. Don't know his name and don't have any idea what he said. At the end of that, he said, if anybody wants to receive Christ, come down, and they played 14 verses of Just As I Am. Well, I didn't know any better. I got up, went down there, and told the guy. He said, wanted to know if I came to be saved. Said, no, I've been saved. God just told me to be an orthopedic surgeon. Well, he didn't know what that was either, so... Anyhow, I went home, and the next day my mother said, "What happened to you at the Baptist church last night?" And I told her. What I didn't know was that my whole life, I'm 90 years old now. The fact I'm standing up here talking to you is a miracle in and of itself. But my whole life was laid out in front of me at 16. I didn't know any better. My dad said, if you go to play college basketball on scholarship, they'll own you. You won't get into medical school. A door opened for an academic scholarship, and I went to a college in Memphis that had the highest successful acceptance into medical school in the state of Tennessee. As a third-year medical student, third-year student, somebody said, you ought to go ahead and apply to, I hope you don't hear the noise that comes in my hearing aids. You ought to go ahead and apply because at least they'll know your name at the medical school. So I did. Well, I get a note. We had one telephone in the dorm. I get a note on there to call this telephone number. I called it up, and the lady said that she was a secretary to the dean of the medical school. This is before there was any MCAT or any of that kind of stuff. And she said, you need to come down and have a visit with the dean. I had no earthly idea what that was all about. I went there. We talked for half an hour. He asked me a whole lot of questions I couldn't answer and said, my secretary will call you. A couple of weeks goes by, she calls. She said, Mr. Winslow, you've got to come and fill out some forms. She didn't tell me what the forms were for. I walked in, realized that I was signing up to become a medical student in 3 months. I also played basketball in college. That was the end of my eligibility there quickly. So I went to med school, did okay, found out that the Camel Clinic that was a part of the med center had a teaching meeting on Monday night when they discussed all the tough cases that had come before them. And I started going to it. I thought if I'm going to be one of those kind of doctors, I probably ought to find out something about it. And I went there night after night. I wound up getting a residency at the Camel Clinic, not because I should have gotten one, but because they knew who I was. I'd been coming, and they recognized that I had some interest in it. So I did my residency there, received an appointment at the end of that to join the staff at the Camel Clinic. Was in the Air Force for 2 years because I had been on the Berry plan in order to get a guaranteed deferment to go through med school. I went back to interview at the Camel Clinic intending to sign up with them and to be an understudy in pediatric orthopedics, only to get there and find out that they wanted to pay me less than what I was making in the Air Force. And my poor wife had worked day and night and born children and put me through school and through a residency that was kind enough to pay me $100 a month and give me a clean white coat every Monday morning. And something in my heart said, you don't need to do this. And so I turned them down. Then I didn't have a place to practice. The guy that I liked least most in my residency had moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. He called me every day and every night and to tell me how great a place Tulsa was. We finally went out to visit the place and fell in love with it. We mainly went to tell him we weren't interested and wound up staying there. That's how I wound up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was not happy with the group I was practicing with. They were older surgeons. They were fixed in their ways, and I had lots of new ideas, some good and some not so good. And two other guys and I sat down and said, well, what do we want to do? And one of them said to me, what do you really want to do? I said, I'd like to build a camel clinic in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we set out to do it. Formed a thing called Eastern Oklahoma Orthopedic Center. And the Lord poured blessings on that like you will not believe. We grew so fast. Every 3 or 4 months, I was back in Memphis trying to recruit another guy to come join us. God talks to you in the bad times of your life, but he's just as apt to talk to you in the good times. That thing took off. We're riding the crest of a wave in orthopedics in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And a guy comes into my office on the busiest morning of the week with no appointment. His name was Oral Roberts. I didn't know what to think about Mr. Roberts. And my nurse said, well, what do you want us to do with him? He's in the waiting room creating a commotion. So I said, well, put him in an exam room and I'll look at him. So a little bit she came and she said, Mr. Roberts is in the exam room. I said, well, go in and tell him to take off his pants and I'll look at his knee. hit his ball into the rough at Southern Hills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hurt his knee. Anyhow, I'm standing outside the door. I didn't know I was standing right by the door where he was. And she said, Dr. Winslow, I am not going to ask Oral Roberts to take off his pants. Now, I may seem like a mild-mannered guy, but I went right through the ceiling. I said, well, I don't have x-ray eyes. If he wants me to look at his knee, he'll have to get his britches off. He heard all that. I walk in and he said, I think you're a character. I said, well, Mr. Roberts, they tell me you are. Well, we had a rule we didn't charge ministers, so he wanted to pay me, and I said, didn't owe me anything. So I went about my business. A few minutes goes by, and a nurse says, you got to go and talk to Mrs. Roberts on the phone. She said, Oral Roberts' wife. Well, she just gave me a fit. She said, we didn't come for charity work, and we want to pay you, and on and on and on. I said, Ms. Roberts, we have a rule in our office. We don't charge ministers. I didn't tell her the truth. That was the truth, but I didn't tell her that their insurance was so bad that it was worth less than it was. It was not all a good thing. At any rate, he was listening on the telephone at the same time. He said, if you won't take my money, will you play golf with me? And we started playing golf together at least once a week, sometimes more. And out of that, his idea of getting into medical education was born. And I wound up trying to help him get a medical school. I didn't know anything about starting a medical school. I had gotten through one time successfully, and that was it. But so he sent me to Washington to the Liaison Committee on Medical Education to see what needed to be done to build a medical school. You got to put yourself in the position they were in. Here comes a young guy, doesn't know anything about medical education, asking how to put a medical school together. And they sent me back to Mr. Roberts with the message he probably couldn't build a medical school. And I learned an important lesson in life. You got to ask the right question. I got sent back to ask not if he could or couldn't, but how to go about it. I had no intention of being a medical school dean, let alone starting a medical school, but finally wound up being appointed, mostly against my will, as the dean of the medical school that didn't exist. and the next 4 years, I had to quit my practice and take a 2/3 cut in pay to do that. But my little wife said, well, if it's something you ought to do, you ought to do it. And so I did. And no intention of building a medical center. But in the process of accreditation, it became obvious that we had to have a concrete affiliation with some hospitals in order to have clinical medical education program. For whatever reason, the 2 Catholic hospitals and the 1 non-denominational hospital didn't want to participate in a medical school connected at Oral Roberts. And I couldn't get them to agree. I tried every trick in the world and nothing worked. And out of that came an interesting thing. Oral's oldest daughter and her husband, and her husband was a friend of mine, were killed in a plane crash. And in the aftermath of that, Oral went to the desert with his wife to let her recover. Not only was it her daughter, it was her best friend. Before he went, his son-in-law said to me, don't give up on Oral. He will figure out what to do. He came home 2 weeks later with an idea in mind. I had told him over and over again, if we don't get an affiliation, the only way we're going to get a medical school going is to build a hospital. And he asked a lot of questions about that, and I told him a lot of answers about what it would take. My idea was to build a 300-bed university hospital. I regret not having brought a picture of the City of Faith to most of you, because if you haven't seen it, it's a magnificent place on appearance. It really is. He had an architect who shared some kind of a color blindness with President Roberts, and they saw certain colors and didn't see other colors. And if you look at that building, it's a gold-looking building, because that's what he could see, that color. His architect was a guy who loved to design weird-looking buildings. And if you think about buildings, we build things in rectangles. Look at that. This room is full of rectangles. This architect came back to put Orwell's ideas on paper with a quadrangular shaped base and 3 towers, one for research, one for clinic, and one for hospital, all triangular shaped buildings. And Orwell thought that was just exactly what he wanted. So I got the joy of trying to figure out, how do you put a healthcare institution together in triangular shaped buildings on a base that doesn't have any parallel walls to it. Now, I didn't come up through architecture, but I quickly found out that you can learn quickly something if you really have to. And an architect in Tulsa who had never designed a healthcare facility, and I visited all over the country, every new hospital that we could think about, particularly one that had an odd shape, and we fit the pieces together into that place. Now, I'm standing up here realizing that there's a couple guys sitting back there who are having to practice medicine in a place I designed, and I don't want them to describe the problems that we created that we didn't know we were creating. In the 1970s, to build a hospital, you had to have a thing called a certificate of need. It was a 2-step process. One part of that, the citizenry of a community was represented by a health systems agency, which is locally designed. And the second level of that was a health planning commission, which was a state-by-state deal, purely political. I'm not a politician. I did run for class president of the freshman class in college against my will, but the fraternity wanted me to go, and I got elected. I don't know how, I just did. Plus of that is that we sat on the student council in alphabetical order, and the lady that sat next to me was a senior whose name was Williams. She had twin sisters, one of whom eventually became my wife of 66 years. So, you can't tell what God's up to when he's doing things. You just have, the door's open, you just have to be smart enough to recognize them. And the whole City of Faith thing was a deal based on God's open doors. Over and over again, I walked through them. I told some of the guys last night that when we had all these hearings locally about building a new hospital, the 3 existing hospitals all got together. For the first time in human history, they all got together. Otherwise, they were fighting one another competitively. They got together to oppose the building of the City of Faith. And that was a formidable group of people in town, many of them leaders. The guy that was the chairman of the board of the of the non-sectarian hospital was a Jewish gentleman who is now one of the 3 wealthiest people in the state of Oklahoma. He was a banker and formerly an oil man. He just put $50 million into the building of a recreational place for young people for the whole community. That's a magnificent place. He called me aside and said, "Tell me what you're doing and why you're doing it so I can understand it." Well, I don't know how successful I was at doing that, but I made an attempt. That day, there was a little bit of a change in what went on in the community about whether or not we should be able to build the building. Simultaneous to that, the sister who was the titular chief of one of the hospitals called me and said, "Come down and meet with me." And I went down to meet with her. And she said, "What you're trying to do is probably good, but I can't do anything with my medical staff. They're opposing you. And it's because some of them are really smart people, but their religious background is such that they're never going to understand what you're doing, let alone how you're going to do it." But that changed the course of events a little bit because she was an ally. The chairman of the Health Planning Commission was an ultimate politician. He said, "Doctor, you'll never get this thing through unless you can get the legislature and the governor of Oklahoma to at least say that it's not a bad thing." I didn't know how to do that. A little state representative from a community near Tulsa that's very close to where I live currently called me and said, "I want you to come to Oklahoma City to meet with me." I did. He turned out to be a sort of a secret supporter of the Oral Roberts ministry. He said, "We've got to go see the most powerful man in the Oklahoma legislature because he holds the key." He was known locally as the Prince of Darkness. I would not have opened the door to say hello to him. You would have had to drag me in there. I suddenly found myself sitting in front of him. He said, "Doctor, here's what it takes." He picks up the phone. He calls some people in. I didn't know they're bill writers that write bills. He had them write a bill which said the Oklahoma Senate approves in one, I don't remember the language exactly, approves of what Oral Roberts is trying to do, building a hospital. Had no force of law whatsoever. It just was a resolution. That thing passed the Oklahoma Senate 35 votes to 0. That was the power that man had. And God used him that day. And then he said, "Now you got to do the same thing in the House of Representatives." Oh, I had to take that bill to the House of Representatives in the state of Oklahoma, get thrown out of some of the offices, trying to get enough people to sign the thing so we knew it would pass. It finally came to a vote, passed 70-17. Of course, there were a few people in the restroom didn't vote. But anyhow, that set the stage for us through politics with somebody that didn't hardly know how to spell the word, let alone what it meant, to get an approval. And then the governor of Oklahoma, who was a Christian and a good educator, but we never could get him to just come right out and say anything in our behalf. He had appointed a new member to the state Supreme Court, and they always had a little, they had a big ceremony on the Capitol steps when those things came out and swore him in and all this. The governor always had a little mini press conference about that time. He turned around after that ceremony was over and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I have 5 minutes." A guy raises his hand, and the governor points to him, and the guy says, "Governor Boren, are you for or against Oral Roberts Hospital?" The governor said, "We're for it." Well, at that point in time, it was a done deal because he appointed the Health Planning Commission. And if he was for it, they were going to vote for it. Passed 3-0. And I thought, we got it made. It's a miracle of all miracles. And a few weeks goes by, and of course, but this time we're pouring concrete, building a building and all that. And I found out that there's a second piece of the Health Planning Act that says that the secretary, at that time it was called Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, a guy named Joe Califano, who was a solid, rock-solid, committed Catholic. Didn't have any use for people who were overt Christians, let alone Pentecostal ones. And he put the word out that he would never sign the piece of paper that enabled us to file claims against Medicare. Now, fortunate for me, President Roberts and President Carter had been friends before. He called up the president and said, "Jimmy, you got to help me out." And the president said, "Well, come up here and let's talk about it." So we go, and I'm a tag along. I get sent down to some office in the West Wing of the White House to talk to somebody who was the chief of staff or something, and about what we needed. And the guy comes and he gets me and hauls me to into the main part of the White House, into the presidential suite where the president actually lives. And here I am, a little kid from Tennessee, 40 years old, wet behind the ears, and I'm sitting down to have lunch with the President of the United States and his wife. I was trembling. In the middle of the lunch, he turns to me and he said, "Now, doctor, explain to me in Georgia peanut farmer language what the problem is." And I guess I must have done a halfway decent job of it. Anyhow, he said, "Well, I'll tell you a secret. The Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare will not be in that office after the election." This was in the late summer, early fall of that year. President Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan. And I thought, well, what is going to happen now to that deal? On the day of the inauguration of Ronald Reagan as President of the United States, a guy shows up in my office with one of those things that's locked on his arm and locked, and I don't know what's going on. He opens it up and hands me the piece of paper signed by the interim Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare to approve us for Medicare. That's how we got there. That's the real story of how the City of Faith came to be. In terms of its design, we ran all over the country. We did do a pretty good job of pulling together. Meantime, I told the architect, I said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but there's no way in the world put doctors' offices into this triangle that's 60 stories tall and about 12,000 square feet per floor." Scott Cadre's practicing in one of those offices. So if it doesn't sit right, he can straighten it out after a while. When we got through expanding the space to make it workable, we had almost doubled the size of that thing. It's way over 1 million square feet in those 3 buildings. It was a decent place to practice medicine. What made it different was not what we did. We had the first MRI in the state of Oklahoma. That's another long story. But you take God's healing power to people by doing what you're supposed to do. If you look in Luke 17, verse 10, it said that servants, and we're servants, ought to do what's required of them, not as a maximum, but as a minimum. That's the message that Jesus was delivering. Our job is to practice the very best medicine that can be done. But we have to add to that a dimension that Jesus could add to it. What did he do? He touched the people. In the touch, there's a miracle itself. When you touch a patient and pray for him, you don't pray out of weakness. You pray with the knowledge that God is with you when you're in the operating room. He is with you when you talk to a patient. He is with you when you have to tell them bad news as well as good news. If you look at the creation story, God created the earth, and what did he pronounce it at the end of that? He said, it's good. Now, it's gotten bad, not because of what God did, but because of what we've managed to do to it. But he put the ability to heal into people. And our job is to enhance that ability to heal. But there's a tremendous power involved in how they perceive what we do to them. The tendency of people is to go to the doctor and say, okay, here I am, fix me. Well, it's our job to make them understand that they have to be a participant in their own recovery and get them to do it. I'm an orthopedist. I can put knees in all day long and have done it all day long. But I can't heal up the skin. I can't make the bone and the appliance that we put in stick to one another. I can't restore the muscle power. I can't restore the balance. I can help relieve the pain. But our job is to do our very best as people of medicine to make people better. But it's our job also to let them know that their healing came from God. It didn't come from us. And it's also believe that God will do and can do what we can't do. I cannot heal anybody. I can just treat them. But I can pray for them. I can touch them. I can let them know that I want to be a part of their lives. We've lost that in medicine. As we become more and more technical, we become less and less touchable. We don't spend time. My primary care physician is an internist. She teaches. She only sees patients on Monday, so that's the only day I can get sick. But that's what's happened to medicine. We become so technological, we don't have good personal relationships with the patient. That's the secret to good health care. The City of Faith was an interesting place. You say, well, it failed. Well, yeah, it failed financially. It did. I kept trying to tell the people that made the decisions at ORU, the various boards, that it would take 10 years for that thing to mature. And it was going to cost a lot of money every year. It took $8 million a year in 1978 just to keep the medical school going that somebody had to raise and bring in. Dr. Swin's sitting here and Dr. Johnson, they understand it's a big job of the university president to raise money to make all these programs happen. It's a big job. All of which said to say this: if God ordains something and he opens the door, all we have to do is be smart enough to walk through it and believe. We'll answer questions later. Thank you.